a new Netflix documentary series about Cent Diddy, Combs, is making headlines for its never-before-seen footage of the music mogul in the days leading up to his arrest. Now, Combs is threatening legal action against Netflix for airing what he claims is unauthorized footage. Behind the series are Combs' longtime rap rival 50 Cent and director Alexandria Stapleton, who recently sat down with NBC News' Kai Malice ahead of the documentary's release. This has cracked the internet wide open. Gene Deal is back in the spotlight, and this time he's claiming that major details were quietly left out of 50 Cent's Netflix documentary. Details that could change everything people think they know. According to Gene, he is now speaking publicly about alleged evidence connected to the Tupac Shakur shooting, including paperwork he says never made it into the final cut, as well as deeper background surrounding Biggie's death that raised serious red flags behind the scenes. You didn't click this by accident. People are saying Gene Deal is exposing moments that 50 Cent chose not to include. And whether you believe the claims or not, they're already sending shockwaves through hip-hop history discussions. So let's get straight into it. No fluff, no delays, just a full breakdown of what's being alleged right now. Here's where things get interesting. 50 Cent reportedly sold his documentary about Cent Diddy Combs to Netflix for a significant sum, and expectations were sky-high across the culture. Many assumed Gene Deal would have a major role, given his close work with Diddy in the past, and years spent sharing his perspective on bad boy record history. But when the documentary premiered, Gene was completely absent. No interviews, no archival clips, no commentary, nothing. People noticed immediately. Now Gene is explaining why. He says that certain footage, conversations, and documents were allegedly removed before release. Material he believes was too sensitive for the final cut. Once you hear his side, it's easy to understand why the producers may have left it on the cutting room floor. In his account, Gene describes stepping away from the project. He mentions evidence suggesting prior knowledge of danger toward Tupac Shakur, a check that raised serious questions, and events surrounding Biggie's death, including warnings that were allegedly ignored at the time. Gene explains that he tried to negotiate payment for his materials, footage, photos, clothing, and other items, but claims he was met with skepticism. I was showing them invoices, showing the prices I've been quoted elsewhere, Gene says, and she was acting like I was lying. I told her, "Who do you think you're talking to?" She claimed nobody paid anybody, but that's not how these things work. Whenever you make a documentary, people expect to be compensated. If a production can spend $10,000 or $15,000 on something, they can pay me for my time and my materials. I wasn't asking for a handout. After repeated disagreements over payment, Gene says he walked away. I said, "Fine, then forget it." I even spoke to 50, but it didn't change anything. And these were her exact words. 50 Cent does not decide what stays in or gets cut from this documentary. That statement completely changes how this entire project looks. So pay close attention. Before we even get into Gene Deal's leaked material, there's a much bigger detail that many people missed. This project was originally planned as a long, in-depth series, reportedly around 10 episodes. Instead, it was suddenly released as a 4-part Netflix series titled Diddy, The Reckoning. The series is filled with footage filmed just days before Cent Diddy Combs began facing serious legal trouble. It includes behind-the-scenes moments, private conversations with lawyers, casual interactions with fans in Harlem, and off-camera footage that most people never expected to see. On the surface, it looks polished and complete. But according to Gene Deal, the real story was never told. The original expectation was that the documentary would examine everything, every allegation, every questionable decision, every contradiction, and every cover story. Gene says that instead, the most critical details were quietly removed. That's where things start to feel uncomfortable. So who is Gene Deal really? He wasn't just nearby. He was directly involved and present. Gene claims that Jake Wolf was not the person responsible for the killing, and that Mark Curry knows this. He also says the so-called East Coast versus West Coast war wasn't truly a regional war at all. According to him, it was more like a personal conflict. Gene explains that Puff became angry with Suge Knight over issues involving Misa and money. From that point, Puff allegedly decided he would no longer deal with either Suge or Misa. However, Gene points out something important. Puff and Suge later had a conversation behind the House of Blues while Tupac was still alive. His point is simple. If there had truly been a real war, if Suge had been responsible for killing someone close, there would have been no conversation, no attempt at peace, no discussion of, are we good? Gene says that conversation happened, which contradicts the idea that there was an all-out war at that time. According to Gene, there was no confrontation like that, no accusation, no moment where Puff said, you know what you did. That, he says, changes the entire narrative people have believed for years. According to Gene, the situation wasn't about Suge Knight threatening Puff over Jake's death. Instead, it was more personal. Suge was angry at Puff for his own reasons, and Puff was angry at Suge for his. The conflict existed strictly between the two of them. Gene explains that this was never a true East Coast versus West Coast war. If it were, artists wouldn't have continued traveling, collaborating, and socializing across coasts. West Coast artists were still welcomed in New York, and East Coast artists were still embraced in Los Angeles. There was no regional hatred, like people later claimed. What it really came down to was Bad Boy versus Death Row, two labels, two CEOs, and their personal issues. That was the real divide. Gene says Suge Knight actually tried to resolve the conflict. Death Row's East Coast representatives planned to organize a peace meeting. They wanted to bring in Eric B. and Big D, both respected East Coast figures, to help mediate and calm tensions between Tupac, Biggie, Death Row, and Bad Boy. What they needed was someone from Bad Boy to attend the meeting. According to Gene, Puff refused. He wouldn't send a representative and wouldn't come himself. Gene also says Puff became angry when he found out certain people from Bad Boy were partying with Suge Knight at the Mirage on 57th Street. That anger reportedly led to phone calls being cut off and relationships breaking down. When asked about Mark Curry, Gene says Mark knows who actually killed Biggie. According to him, it wasn't Wolf. He claims it was a Jamaican man from the Bronx who has since died after being killed by police at Magic City. Gene says Mark Curry is aware of this, even though that information has never been publicly confirmed. Gene also points out that Kirk Burroughs confirmed something important in the documentary. Biggie did not want to go to Los Angeles. There were warnings circulating that it wasn't safe. Despite those warnings, the trip still happened. Gene admits that at the time, he knew they shouldn't have been out like that. There were signs, there were warnings, and in hindsight, the danger was obvious. Diddy's former bodyguard from the height of the Bad Boy era says he was present during some of the most critical moments in hip-hop history. He was in Las Vegas during the East Coast, West Coast tension the night Tupac Shakur was shot, and later in Los Angeles when Biggie was killed. Gene says he witnessed these events as they happened, and now he says he's no longer holding anything back. That leads to the question many people keep asking. Why wasn't Gene Deal included in the documentary at all? Gene recently addressed this in an interview. He says he was involved at first, sharing stories, footage, and personal insight, until one conversation changed everything. That conversation was with director Alexandria Stapleton. According to Gene, she told him clearly that 50 Cent did not control payments or final editorial decisions. When Gene heard the financial offer, he felt dismissed. From his point of view, he was offering exclusive material and direct access to key moments in hip-hop history, but the compensation did not match that value. Because of that, he chose to walk away. There was no argument or public dispute. He simply declined. However, Gene now says money wasn't the only reason he was left out. He points to the way the documentary handled the Quad Studios shooting. While the incident was discussed, Gene says crucial details were left out. According to him, the documentary did not mention that Biggie and Suge Knight did not know that Puff Daddy and Andre Harrell were in Jimmy Henchman's office on the day Tupac was shot at Quad Studios. Gene repeats this point to avoid confusion. Puff Daddy, Andre Harrell, and Jimmy Henchman were all together in that office on that day, and the documentary did not include that detail. Gene claims Puff was there because he was monitoring Biggie. Big was writing material connected to Junior MAFI, and Puff had control over Big's publishing at the time. Gene says he has told this story before, but now others repeat it as if they discovered it themselves, even though they cannot explain how they supposedly know these details. According to Gene, Puff owned Big's publishing, and people who had helped Big also advised him to put the publishing under someone else's name, so he could still receive the money. Gene says that situation led to Puff keeping a close watch on Big. Gene then claims that while Puff was there, Jimmy Henchman told him that Tupac needed to be taught a lesson over money Pac allegedly owed. Gene says Tupac was coming to the studio to work off that debt by recording a song with Lil Sean. He adds that Tupac had been disrespectful toward Jimmy Henchman, and Gene describes Henchman as someone who did not tolerate that kind of behavior. Based on Gene's account, he believes Diddy knew something was going to happen to Tupac that night. Gene Deal claims Diddy knew what was going to happen to Tupac. According to Gene, Diddy wasn't just present. He was there specifically to witness the events unfold. He didn't go upstairs to the studio session with Biggie, even though he knew where Biggie was, because Jimmy Henchman had informed him of the plan for Tupac. Gene stresses that this was deliberate, and he maintains it as fact. He says the documentary left out massive pieces of evidence, including key details about the East Coast, West Coast conflict. According to Gene, the film skipped over critical truths about the death of bodyguard Jake Wolf, and he claims Mark Curry knows far more than what was presented. Gene argues that the idea of a mysterious, high-level conspiracy is overblown. He says the events were street-level, involving someone from the Bronx, who was later killed in a separate incident at Magic City. The narrative of East Coast versus West Coast, he insists, is misleading. The real tension existed at the top between Bad Boy Records and Death Row Records, not among entire coasts. Artists still traveled freely. East Coast rappers were welcomed on the West Coast. West Coast artists still performed in New York. The culture itself remained largely intact. The friction, Gene says, was personal, between Diddy and Suge Knight. He claims the documentary ignored this. He also highlights another element the series skipped, the role of jealousy in the tension. Gene says the animosity partly came from Diddy's envy of Tupac's natural charisma and the attention he received from women, something Diddy could not achieve without his wealth and status. Gene recalls seeing this dynamic firsthand. According to Gene, Death Row attempted to de-escalate the conflict by arranging a meeting between Tupac and Biggie, but Diddy refused to attend and didn't send anyone from Bad Boy. That refusal, he says, was a turning point, and the documentary's omission of this fact changes the narrative entirely. Gene believes that early intervention could have prevented the escalation, but the decisions made allowed the tension to spiral out of control. And now, Gene says, the story reaches its most explosive claims. Gene Deal claims there was advance awareness of what was about to happen at Quad Studios in 1994, and that certain individuals were far closer to the situation than the public has ever been told. While the documentary briefly references a Quad Studios shooting, Gene insists the most critical detail was deliberately left out. According to Gene, he personally witnessed $1 million check that raised serious questions. He says an associate showed him the check, briefly displayed it, and then walked away. The money, Gene was told, came from Barry Hankerson and Jimmy Henchman for the launch of Blackground Records. If that's true, Gene argues, the paper trail should still exist. A transaction of that size doesn't just disappear. He believes tracing the check would expose connections people have avoided discussing for decades. Gene further claims that on the same day as the Quad Studios shooting, Diddy, Andre Harrell, and Jimmy Henchman were together in Jimmy's office. He emphasizes that Biggie and those around him had no idea Diddy was there. Diddy was expected to be upstairs at the studio session, but according to Gene, he stayed behind, observing quietly. Gene believes this wasn't accidental. It was business. From his perspective, the evidence is still sitting in plain sight for anyone willing to follow it. He suggests investigators could determine whether Diddy had any role in how that money was distributed, whether it moved through intermediaries, or whether favors were exchanged. Gene points out that even now, tracing $1 million check would either confirm or disprove what he claims to have seen. The individual connected to the check is no longer alive, but financial records don't die. Gene also connects this to Biggie's publishing situation. At the time, Diddy controlled Biggie's publishing, and Biggie was actively trying to restructure that arrangement. Advisors reportedly encouraged him to place the publishing under another name, so he could secure his earnings directly. Gene suggests this business tension adds another layer to what was happening behind the scenes during that period. According to Gene Deal, None of this was random, and none of it was fully told. According to Gene Deal, Diddy was closely monitoring the situation at Quad Studios. While in Jimmy Henchman's office, Gene claims he overheard Henchman indicate that Tupac was about to be confronted over a financial dispute. Tupac was expected to come in and settle things professionally, but tensions had already escalated. Gene insists Diddy fully understood what was about to happen. The detail that stands out and has everyone talking is that if Diddy thought it was no big deal, he would have gone straight upstairs to check on Biggie. Instead, Gene says Diddy stayed put, watching events unfold. This, Gene stresses, isn't rumor or speculation. It's first-hand observation. He believes the documentary deliberately left this out. What makes this moment so striking, according to Gene, is that the warning signs were obvious. Certain people had advanced knowledge of what was coming, yet no one acted to prevent it. The documentary ignores this entirely. Gene also explains why the tension between Sean Diddy Combs and Tupac Shakur ran so deep, providing context the official series chose to skip. Like and subscribe.